happens quickly, where all of a sudden it becomes quid pro quo. It becomes a reciprocation. I will treat you as a human because, I was told that if I do that in economics, that the incentives and the motives will lead me to a higher bottom line, right? So all of a sudden it becomes that transactional thing again. And the minute you transactionalize it, you start losing the relational aspect and the humanization of it. So I always like to say, you know what? If you're going to get to know your people better, just get to know them better. If you're going to spend, instead of 1 minute, you're going to spend 10 minutes on a Monday and walk around and ask them how their weekend was.
Your business's success depends on relationships with customers, relationships with employees, and relationships with stakeholders. What do they have all have in common? They're all human, because no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Welcome to the Human Connection Podcast. I'm your host, Carl Ponto. Each week, I'll bring you stories, insights, and practical advice from experts that you can apply to your growing company and daily life. This week, I'm excited to connect with Seung Paik. He is a retired Air Force colonel, keynote speaker, mentorship consultant, and now author of Leadernomics, Life and Leadership Lessons from My Mentor, Economics. An award-winning educator, he has taught economics at the United States Air Force Academy and at the University of Colorado. He and his wife, Grace, live in San Francisco with their puppy, Lulu, and are empty nesters to 3 amazing kids. Mm-hmm. Congrats on Leadernomics and welcome to the Human Connection Podcast.
Great. Thanks, Carl, for having me. And I also want to give a shout out to Chelsea Burns for being that mutual friend and connection. So it's great to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're the perfect person to talk about what your book's about, which is how leadership and decisions that leaders make, how a lot of the paradigms they've been using for so long about how they make decisions and what factors they take into account are shifting and changing with the market, and how a lot of them are no longer really applicable. So how do you recommend leaders go about building new decision-making frameworks?
So for me, it's interesting because obviously leadership, the principles of leadership have been around for forever. And I think for the most part, there's nothing new under the sun. And so I like to kind of look at things from a fresh perspective sometimes. And so when I was in school and I was going to a military academy where we were actually considered a leadership laboratory. So you're eating, breathing, speaking, thinking leadership 24/7 at the Air Force Academy and the other service academies that students go to. And yet in the midst of that leadership laboratory, the interesting thing is it wasn't any individual leader, person, officer, historian. Nothing of those were what immediately resonated with me about leadership principles. Instead, it was a class called Econ 101. And so when I was in economics, the first several principles that I came across, principles like sunk cost, opportunity cost, marginal analysis, diminishing returns, sometimes common language, depending on the audience, but these were all new terms that I was learning as a college freshman. And I was amazed at how these principles and these definitions were not only probing into my thoughts and my intentions, but they were starting to cultivate an understanding of my priorities, my preferences, my motives and motivations. And so it's in the midst of this class, I'm starting to realize, wait, this discipline called economics, it's kind of giving me an objective guidance with a subjective probing into my individual uniqueness about how to make decisions and how to relate with other people. And when you peel back the layers, the definition of economics is the study of human behavior, the study of human choice amidst scarcity. So it makes total sense that if this is the actual discipline that studies human behavior in decision making, why wouldn't I want this and need to know this in the area of leadership, where it's truly all about relationships between leaders and followers and leaders? So I started looking into economics, not just in the form of a college major, but I really started looking toward it as a form of mentorship for leadership. And my framework was built around 10 primary principles from core economics. And what I have come to realize, Carl, over the years is that of the thousands upon thousands of leadership tools and leadership application principles that are out there, I haven't found a single one that doesn't fit somewhere in the framework of those 10 economic principles. So I like to say that I'm not a big fan of this terminology of more tools for your tool bag. I'm a big fan of why don't you just get the tool bag itself? Because then when you get all these other little tools for your leadership tool bag, you'll know exactly where it fits and how it should fit because you have the tool bag itself. And that's Leadernomics. Leadernomics to me is an economic framework by which every other leadership principle and tool, it fits into that tool bag.
I do think there is an overload that people are, as leaders, are experiencing with trying to keep up with the changes and at least the ones that are actual leaders is personal growth and improving their own mindsets and their skills and their ability to lead. It can get really overwhelming. There's only so much people can manage at one point, and so having the right, not just like you mentioned, I think trying to stuff more tools in the same tool bag can be overwhelming. But if you think about it from, well, how is my bag organized? What's the bag that I'm using that I'm putting these tools into? That is a better perspective because it gives you much more of a holistic view of the situation as it really is, and not just super compartmentalized view, which is, if anyone's looked through a overstuffed bag, it can be hard to find the thing you're looking for if you don't even know what your whole scope or what area you're searching is in. So when you're working with people, what have you found has been the sort of transformation that happens when they apply this framework?
So, and this is where it really gets to the H to H emphasis that you have on your show and the human connection, is that at the end of the day, leaders have to produce, they have to perform. If you are a leader with any vision, mission, production, at some point you have to show that you have achieved certain milestones, certain goals. And if you don't, you're probably not going to stay in that position very long. That's just the nature of leadership, right? You can be the greatest coach, greatest leader in the world, but if your wins and losses are always below 500, I hate to say it, you're probably not going to be a coach and a leader for very long. So there is an aspect to leadership that has a metric level milestone that the world is looking toward to measure whether or not you're succeeding as a leader. But it's in that process of trying to achieve those bottom line goals and those metrics that we, though we are human, we begin to perceive our people as commodities. It's a natural inclination. And it's why, like, even in economics, it's funny, like if you open the textbook, you'll see two inputs to production. One is called capital, one is called labor. And the way labor is described, it's described as a corollary to capital, right? To machines, technology, hardware. And then on the other spectrum, you have labor, but they're an input to production. And you can even begin to see, even in the textbook, how labor, just by the word labor and its correlation to capital, you begin to dehumanize what labor really is. It's people, right? And so that is what ends up happening in this society of markets where we're driven by profit motive, incentives, reaching the bottom line, hitting those milestones and metrics. There is just this subtle, slow tendency for even the greatest humans, greatest human leaders, to begin to subtly commodify human beings to achieve those bottom line goals. Economics, interestingly enough, has always been a human endeavor. And that's why I get back to that notion of how is it that a discipline is able to probe my heart, my motives, my intentions, because it was designed as a human endeavor for human behavior. And so the one thing about economics, even though so many people associate economics with dollars and money and profits and revenue, they forget that economics at its heart is always to esteem and uphold humanity for the purposes of humanity, right? And that's where economics is driving toward. And so it's the one discipline that always remembers that at the heart of every market relationship, whether it's supplier, and demand, whether it's producer and consumer, whether it's leader or follower, whatever relationship exists in the market, it's based on a human endeavor. And so that's why all the principles, if they're perceived from the proper light of economics, it will always remind us to stop commodifying and to remember that this thing called labor, they're human. And it doesn't just apply to the people that work for us, it also applies to ourselves.
And so how do you, because I agree that there's the, I know obviously the current state of the market in the world is evidence of the how dehumanizing and commoditizing the mindset has been for a lot of like executives and businesses in the marketplace. And so how do you recommend people go about making that, shifting that mindset as a leader to rehumanize their employees and their relationships with the customers or the clients or with vendors? How do you recommend they go about kind of reversing this trend so that they're, especially these days, it'll help, I'm going to make them stand out drastically to their competitors and be a lot more appealing to the people that are around their business, and we can really help them achieve the success they've been striving to for so long, because they're no longer playing the same game as everyone else who's been kind of unaware or kind of voluntarily swayed by this dehumanization.
Yeah, so it's first, I mean, so one thing I love about economics, right? It's not industry specific, it's universal. So it's for all people, all ethnicities, all genders, all times throughout history. It's universally applicable. So I never try to get industry centric or specific. Mm-hmm. And the second thing that I always like to remember about economics is that if you peel back the layer of the language of economics, you're always going to hear terms like this: maximum, optimal, greatest, best. You never hear economics settling for better, more, improvement. It doesn't use that type of language. Economics is designed to get you not from good to better, but it's really designed to get to best, maximum, greatest, optimal. And so there's a part of the discipline where, first of all, I'd like to remind all folks, you have to trust the discipline. The discipline says it's going to get you to a place of here, not just here. It's going to get you to here, but you got to trust that it's going to do that. And then it lays out the principles of how it's going to do that. And if so many leaders say things like this: oh yeah, Seung, of course the human element is important. That's why, I get to know my people. And so if you're telling me, Seung, that I spend more time getting to know my people, that it's going to improve my bottom line. And the simple answer to that is, yeah, it will, right? Because the minute you start humanizing your people, you're going to start getting humanized results, right? So the simple answer is yes. But the problem with, once again, is in leadership, we start looking at that end goal of the milestone and the metric. And then we think, oh, if I humanize my people, I can get more out of them toward that bottom line. And I'll tell you, the slippery slope toward refocusing onto that bottom line, it happens quickly, where all of a sudden becomes quid pro quo. It becomes a reciprocation. I will treat you as a human because, oh, I was told that if I do that in economics, that the incentives and the motives will lead me to a higher bottom line, right? So all of a sudden it becomes that transactional thing again. And the minute you transactionalize it, you start losing the relational aspect and the humanization of it. So I always like to say, you know what? If you're going to get to know your people better, just get to know them better. If you're going to spend, instead of 1 minute, you're going to spend 10 minutes on a Monday and walk around and ask them how their weekend was, do it because that is just the right human thing to do. Do not do it because you have this connective dot that it's going to somehow improve your bottom line. That's where the trust comes in. The trust is that that'll happen. It'll happen in ways that you can't even imagine, but that's not why. You do it because this discipline called economics, which is centered around human decision-making and human behavior, if you treat people like humans, human behavior, human incentives, and human motives will respond back to you as only the way a human can, right? That's the key is if I am that kind of guy that is constantly looking at you and perceiving you from a transactional perspective of what are you going to produce for me in terms of dollars, metrics, then at the end of the day, you're only going to produce how I perceive you and how I view you. And at the end of the day, if I view you transactionally, all you're going to produce for me is transaction.
That is a huge mindset shift from the kind of what a lot of executives have had the last couple decades with all the data driven and trying to connect the dots to what inputs deliver the outputs of the results they want. There's been such a focus on getting all this data and understanding how everything's working that and also it does what you did said makes sense, that because if you still are focusing on that, having that mindset, if you're going into, oh, I need to build relationships because I'm trying to still get this output from people, it does still reduce it down to the transactional level and defeats the purpose. And so I think it is, it's true that the going about it not because you're expecting a specific outcome, but that and because you need to track it, and then like, almost like it's like a micromanager version of relationship building versus the leader way of building relationship building, because the micromanager is going to like look at every point and overlook, see everything and try and figure out all the process and what's going on that they make sure they want from it. But then by doing so, it ruins the whole thing. Whereas the leader who just trusts their team and does it because it's the right thing to do and because they actually want to build relationships and trusts, like I said, that by putting that effort in and building those relationships, that they'll get what they want from the relationship, just not in the way that is they have to track, or they can even track step by step and measure as closely as they become used to. But it's and I think that's going to be one of the hardest mindset shifts to make, is kind of the release of the control or the numbers behind it, or at least the numbers in like a step-by-step way, but the results that come from putting that trust back in your team and not micromanaging the relationship in that way is a huge boost to ROI. But I think it's going to be hard for a lot of people to give up that sense of control, because
Yes.
They don't realize that it's that quote unquote control that is basically just like strangling the
Yes.
results they want and keeps them from getting what they're looking for.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's complex, and yet it's simple. And just the way you kind of articulated that is it's a journey. And so like Carl, I get so many people that will hear these principles, they'll resonate with it, and immediately they'll ask me this. So Seung, what do you think are like the 10 things that I need to do to become more relational in that way? And when they ask me that, immediately my first thought is this: you just missed my point. You missed it. Your heart is trying to get to the right place in this notion of humanizing the relationship between leader and follower. But your follow-up question of what are the 10 things I must do, you've just legalized yourself again. You've just transacted yourself, because now you've gone from this mindset of, oh yeah, I do need to be a more relational human boss, human leader, human influencer, visionary. Give me the 10 things. Why? Because if I give you the 10 things and you check off those 10 things, have you now all of a sudden metriced yourself? You've kind of commodified yourself, because now you've objectified the fact that if you do those 10 things, that you are somehow a more tangible, better maximum leader. And you've missed the point. And so people always want the prescriptive, because the prescriptive is tangible. It's fast, it's expedient. That's the nature of our culture. That's the nature of tangible, measurable leadership. And I tell them, and I try to say it in the gentlest of ways, that that's not the goal. Because the minute you do that, let's say I said this: hey, instead of talking with them for a minute in the morning, try expanding it to 5 or 10. But if they all of a sudden get it in their mind that 5 or 10 is the magic number, and yet they don't see any results, like nothing has really changed relationally or productivity wise, then in their mind they're thinking, well, that failed, right? That was never the goal. The goal was simply to say, hey, it's not about the 5 or the 10 minutes. It's actually, it could still be 1 minute, but my principle is, in that 1 minute, in that 60 seconds, don't count the clock. Just ask them with sincerity. Your people are smart. They're insightful. They can catch pretty quick when you ask them, how was your weekend? They can see whether or not you're checking the block or whether you actually mean it, right? And so that's, when I was at the Pentagon, I'm just going to give you a quick story here. When I was at the Pentagon, and this is part of one of the stories in my book, at that time in my leadership officer life, general officers were like gods, right? And they were mythical, heroic figures that won battles across the battlefield. And I could get about as close at max, I could get within 100 yards of a general officer. When I got to the Pentagon, general officers were a dime a dozen. And my job, I actually had 2 bosses simultaneously, and they were both 2-star generals. And I was immediately in awe, and I thought, oh my goodness, my direct boss, I've got 2-star generals that I'm working for. And I call it the tale of 2 generals, because one was transactional, the other was relational. Both came around most mornings after a weekend to ask the team how their weekend was. But one almost never looked at you in the eyes. They would ask you, how was your weekend? And their eyes are already looking toward the next person that they've got to go to ask the same question. And it doesn't take very long for someone like myself. Oh, and by the way, that transactional general, over the course of over a year, Carl, never called me by my first name. Always called me by my rank. Never called me by my first name. In fact, never even knew if I was married or had 3 kids and was about to give birth to another. This leader was on a fast track, was going to get promoted, was doing great things, but was never getting more than what they asked for. They always got what they asked for because we had to obey and deliver, but they never got more. This other 2-star, that was the relational 2-star, It's not like that 2-star spent more time with us, but you just got this vibe that they were really wanting to know you for who you were. Always called me by my first name, even asked, how's Grace doing, your wife, right? And when we were about to have our third child, how's the pregnancy coming along, right? It didn't take long, but it was very personal. And then we had this summer hire program where you hire college students to come and do an internship for a couple of months. And when that summer intern was getting ready to leave, we did a little potluck to just send this young lady off. The 2-star transactional boss never stopped by. Don't ever think even maybe said hello to her maybe once. The relational 2-star wasn't invited because obviously they're so busy. Somehow found out about the farewell through his secretary, popped in by surprise, not only sat in this college student's farewell. Now, mind you, this is a 2-star general that probably should be somewhere on CNBC giving a 10-minute interview to some public media company. He's in there for her farewell. And then at the end of the farewell, he stands up with the most serious face and says, how come I wasn't invited, guys? And then he cracked a smile. So we were like, oh, thank God he's not mad at us. But he meant it sincerely. And then he got up to the front of the room and he said, if you guys would offer me a few minutes, I'd like to thank our summer hire for what she did this summer by name, knew her fiance's name, and then wished her well and connected everything she did that summer to our overall mission. Well, let me tell you, that 21-year-old summer hire, her eyes, I looked at her as that 2-star general was speaking, and her eyes just popped wide open, as if this most important person not only saw her, but valued her, esteemed her, and understood her. And our whole team, when that general left, we were sitting around. The only thing we could say was, that's my general. We had 2 bosses, 2 general officers. No one ever said, that's my general about the other guy. But this other one, we all said, that's my general. And there's not a single person in that room, Carl, that wouldn't have broken through walls, climbed over fences, and leaped rivers to get to the other side for that guy, right? It's just incredible.
I love that story. Thank you so much for connecting with me today, Seung. If you enjoyed this episode of the Human Connection Podcast, please like, leave a review, and share it. If you'd like to connect with either of us, check out the links in the show notes. And remember, no matter if your business is B2B or B2C, it's really H to H, human to human. Happy connecting.